Today I want to show you how I made this enchanted forest in my world, including how I made the trees, the terrain, and all the detailing. And trust me, there's a lot of that in this one. I love how immersive it feels, and it's become one of the favorite parts of my world to walk through for that reason. I hope you enjoy. Let's jump in. Alright, so the most important part of any forest is, of course, the trees. When you're walking through here, you got a nice canopy cover. It feels really immersive. You can't see out of it too far. Of course, here I have a mix of oak and birch. This whole forest is made up of only 7 trees that I copy-pasted all over the place, so although when you're walking through they look all unique, they're really just identical, or most of them are. So I'll go over how to make these first, and then go over to the rest of the forest. So out in the ocean I have all of my trees. There's one arbutus tree here at the end, ignore that one, but the other 7 are the ones that make up that forest. So starting with the oak, we can look at the colors used here. So we use stripped spruce wood and then regular oak wood. Similar colors, but just kind of breaks up the texturing, and then kind of complemented with little bits of spruce, like fences, slabs, stairs, gates over here. And then for kind of a medium size between the logs and the smaller bits, the walls fit in really well as kind of like a medium-sized branch. The mud walls aren't a perfect match with the stripped spruce and the oak wood, but they're pretty good, especially from a distance, and when you're in the forest with lots of things going on, they're not bad. But there is a difference of color there a little bit. So with these oak trees, what I did was made the base fairly large and then kind of came up into one trunk. And then I had lots of branches, and these branches are very horizontal. They only go up about a block. So this one comes out, goes up a block, and then kind of ends over here. This one goes up a block, and then ends over there. They don't really go up too much. It's mostly all horizontal. And then at the top, I'll just do a little bit up here. So these are made mostly out of walls for this one. The bigger one over here has some full-size blocks and some slabs before transitioning into the walls. Again, not a lot of elevation change, mostly just horizontal. And then just oak leaves for the leaves. I'm going to show you how I made these leaves on this branch over here. I kind of did the same thing for all of them. Basically start with like a semicircle around the branches, and then I slowly get rid of some blocks and then add in a couple leaves, and then it's usually good. So I kind of have this cross shape. This is what I did for a lot of them. They're not all across, sometimes there's only 2, but this sort of point comes to the middle and then some smaller branches coming out. You can see on this one over here, really similar idea. One branch with little tiny ones coming out at the end. So around the tiny ones, I made basically a circle. Doesn't have to be perfect, but something like this shape. And then after I had a rough semicircle, don't need to quite connect it if it's going in this side, but the rest of it should be. Then I kind of just came over the top and filled in whatever wasn't there. And then maybe over here I'd go up like this or something. Now, that looks pretty bad. So the next step was getting rid of about like 15% of these leaves, roughly that. Before I'll do that, I'll add in just a couple that drop down a little bit to make it kind of look like they're little bits hanging down. You can see on the other trees there's little areas. And then now I'll go in and kind of just remove every few blocks. Maybe I'll just loosen that up a little bit, like that one. This is a little time consuming. You gotta take some step back and stuff. That was pretty good. I think it's still a little bit too dense. Maybe that one, that might be too much. No, that's okay. And then you also want to see what it looks like when you're walking underneath it. When the trees are isolated like this, having sparse leaves doesn't necessarily look the best. It's a little bit more clear in the birch trees. There's a lot of sky behind it, and it doesn't make it look quite as good. But as you can see over there, when they're all in the forest together, you have textures of leaves behind the leaves, so that makes it look a lot more lush. And if you were not to make the trees sparse, if you were to basically just do the semicircle of leaves and then leave it at that, this would look really overgrown and probably too dense to make it look realistic. Because when you're walking through this, then there's still sparseness and you can still see the light coming through. When there's lots of trees all together, it makes it work. When you have one tree by itself, Like this one, for example, I had more leaves in here than I did elsewhere. You can still see the sky coming through. I still sparsed it up a little bit, but not as much as the ones in here, because I knew these ones were all going to be next to each other. So that's how I made the leaves. I'll just go over the rest of the oak trees. This was kind of like a medium-sized one. The smaller one over here, again, similar, very horizontal branches. This one had a little bit of shape in the trunk, but still a pretty large base considering the tree is not that big. We had this medium one I showed you, much taller before there's any branches out, and a really large base. Also, the branches go out much farther, like 6 or 7 blocks from the sides, compared to the small one is only like 3. And then I had the super tall one. This one had a couple small branches at the bottom that are only a couple blocks out, and then I did more of the bigger branches, like this one here. Yeah, so these are the only 4 oak trees I made. They're all just kind of scattered over there randomly. Kind of copy-pasted them and rotated them so they didn't look all identical. So yeah, the thing with oak trees, horizontal branches, and with the birch trees, it's pretty obvious immediately that the branches are very vertical. There's about like a 20-degree angle from the vertical trunk there to the side. These were made from birch logs, and then diorite actually goes really well with them. And you can also use the diorite stairs, walls, slabs, all that stuff. And then when it comes to the branches, they're almost entirely out of diorite walls until you get to the top, and then I threw in some birch fences, which again isn't necessarily the best color match. It's not bad, but it could be better. I think the mud walls are slightly closer to the oak than the fences are to the birch, even though they are birch fences. So mostly walls and pretty vertical coming all the way up, and then at the top I did put in some fences here, but there wasn't as much as over here. You can see when it comes to a point I'm bringing out 2 blocks or something. These ones were pretty self-contained, just usually a fence gate, and that was it. Similar style, I made like a semi-sphere, and then I would just bring down the blocks in a couple of areas and then get rid of the blocks elsewhere. And then I just did, 3 trees. These ones are much taller. The branches start way higher than these ones. You can see here it's like 1 or 2 blocks above where the player would be walking, but here there's at least 8 blocks until you get tiny leaves. So yeah, I only did 3 birch trees, but these 7 were enough. When I'm walking through the forest, I don't look at a tree and recognize it from a few minutes earlier. They all seem to blend well. So yeah, that was the trees. Walking through here, you can get some of the sky coming through, but when you're looking at like this angle, the trees look pretty opaque. So if you're gonna make a forest, you gotta make the leaves sparse, otherwise it'll look too dense. Yeah, but if you're gonna do a standalone tree, then sometimes you can make it a little bit more dense. I want to quickly go over the terrain I made here. This area I made pretty much all by hand originally, with just grass blocks to get kind of like the rough shape throughout here. So I wanted to go over the rock structures I made, and then also the elevation, because flat forests can end up looking pretty boring. And then also if they're all flat and you have taller trees, then you can see between the branches. And if that's something you're going for, that's cool. But if I was to make just a birch forest, it would be really easy to see between all these branches, and I would be able to see out of the forest. And as I mentioned in my other forest video, something I want to do is when the player is inside the forest, I want to make sure they can't really see out of it super easy. And then that way it makes the forest feel bigger when you're inside of it, which is always what I'm going for. So we can see this area up here has just kind of a gradual rise, which I thought was important because if it was flat, it would be pretty boring. And then at the top, I had this massive rock here. Something I always try and do is try and build suspense when you're walking along the path. In this case, it kind of just looks like you're walking up the path, you see this rock, and then you notice that the path curves around it. And for me, at least, to kind of build excitement, I want to see what's on the other side of the rock, so I start kind of running along here. And I know there's a tree in the way, I still can't quite see around there, and then you come around. There's not a massive reward here or anything, but it kind of makes the player want to skip through the forest. I think it's on theme with the Enchanted brand. And then coming in the other direction again, a nice kind of slope up, a little bit steeper. And then when you get to the top, kind of a similar thing. If you're coming in another direction, you want to run around this rock to see. And coming this way, you do get a little bit of a reward because you get to see the village over here I made. The other place I kind of added in a rock for this effect was towards the end here of this path. If you look throughout this way, you can kind of see, you get a couple hints of the castle. There's one there, and a little bit back here, you can kind of see a little bit. It's pretty hard though. But if you're walking along the path and you see, ooh, that looks pretty cool. Looks like the top of a castle. I want to know what that is. I want to run around. I force you to run around this rock, so it builds suspense for a few seconds. And then when you finally get around this rock, then you get the view. It's still sort of obscured by this forest here. It really points your direction toward the castle, and then the forest on this side kind of gives the other side the border, so you kind of just get like this square view of castle. It's a limited view that makes you want to continue walking through the forest to get the full view, but it's one of my favorite sight lines in this world. I love the arch of the bridge. I like this castle. It's super lush with all of the leaves and vines and stuff on it, and I think it fits well with the surrounding enchanted forest. So you want to continue running across here until you get to the castle and you finally get the full thing. So I try and make almost every second of this forest exciting by wanting the player to continue walking. There's always something to look at, something that you want to get through the forest. There's a reason why you're going through it. So yeah, that was most of the terrain. Again, just kind of bringing the path up and down in certain spaces kind of adds a lot. I think this area here is probably too flat. Like, there wasn't any elevation through all this area. If I was to do this again, I'd probably lower this whole area by a block or raise it up by a block, just to add a little bit more variety. But again, this is the main part. I also added some other rock formations. I made a little witch hut in here, but this whole area here, it's kind of a big rock formation to stop the player's ability to see the castle and kind of the rest of the farming village from this path. There's a big rock in the way, so even though I guess you can see a little bit through here in these trees, but it stops the player looking at the main view until I want them to, which would be the end of the path over there. I also had another kind of rock structure over here. Not necessarily for that reason. I wasn't blocking anything with this one. I just wanted something else to look at besides all the trees, even though I ended up putting a tree on top of it. So yeah, elevation is important in the forest. Don't make it flat. And then you can add in some big rock structures to kind of focus the player's gaze where you want it to and create some fun sight lines. So after I made the terrain shapes and added in all the trees, which was pretty time consuming, even though I was copy pasting them, it still took a while. The next area I had to focus on to make this forest look enchanted was all the detailing. And this kind of just looks like putting in some beehives to get some life in here, adding in some spore blossoms, which at the time was kind of one of the only ways to get particles. Now leaves drop their own little leaves, which is absolutely fantastic. I love that. Great addition. But focusing on the forest floor, I was using grass blocks, moss blocks, coarse dirt, and rooted dirt for the floor. I just pasted this in using World Edit, kind of a rough 25% ratio of each. But you could also do this by hand, it's just time consuming. And then the next area I focused on was kind of like the tall things, so the twisted vines and the bamboo. I had to put string over both of these so they would stop growing. So all of them have a string over top of them to keep them at the height I wanted to. And I didn't put these like super close to the path most of the time. I mean, this one's a little bit closer to the path, but it's usually kind of farther in the back because I wanted the height. When it's closer to the path, I put in a lot more flowers, ferns, these pickles, kind of shorter things that would be more visible from the path. There are still flowers and stuff over here, but just not quite as many. I focused the small stuff on the path, like the small drip leaf as well, and the berry bushes. Honestly, I threw in almost every plant I could in here. Yeah, like there's mushrooms where the light level was low enough for them to grow. And then on the rock structures here, I added some weeping vines, the glowberries, rooted dirt, and then even some fences every now and then just along the path to make it look a little bit more purpose-made. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of rhyme or reason to this. I was kind of just throwing things wherever they would fit. You can see walking through here, almost every block has something on it, like this one doesn't, but pretty much all have some sort of flower or greenery of some sort. There's also just kind of piles of leaves every now and then, like little bushes. And then also lots of rocks. These ones, I was really happy with how I made these actually. I should make these again. Stone, andesite, moss, and mossy cobblestone with like the base of it, and then kind of using the stairs and slabs to make it smoother, and then also using the glow lichen to kind of just have a different color on the blocks. It just changes it really subtly, but in a way I found really appealing. And then in many areas I ended up throwing some pickles on top of the rocks, kind of like this, just because it was sort of the same color, and I figured it added a little bit more of interest. So that was most of the detailing I did. I also threw in some specific things, like this was a fallen tree that kind of has stuff growing on it, and like a bamboo I won't allow to grow. Just for some fun things to look at off of the path. Like there's also a little kind of witch house back there, just while you're in the path going between places, I wanted to add some interest. So actual detailing like this, and then just a bunch of little blocks to make it feel more immersive. I'm sure I'm missing some of the stuff I threw in here. There was a lot of different ones, like the cornflowers. I like the blue colors. I felt like they worked pretty well, nicely. Yeah, mushrooms. I know somewhere I used dripstone to kind of look like a mushroom as well. Honestly, there's so many blocks here you can use. There's so many in the game now. Yeah, there we go. There's one dripstone there within this mushroom patch here. It kind of blends in pretty nicely. Yeah, and then the beehive there kind of adds some more life and more movement in here, which is exactly what you'd want from an enchanted forest. You could also build some mushrooms from like birch fences and maybe some sort of wall, like with sandstone. If you wanted some full-size mushrooms, maybe not there, but like here or something. And then you could go like this one, and then trapdoor that. Something like this kind of looks like a mushroom. There's lots of things you could do. If you were to put a bunch of these in, they'd be pretty immersive and make it feel more enchanted. I wasn't necessarily going for enchanted when I first built this, but it kind of turned it out that way with all the life I put in it. And adding in some other elements like the twisting vines. They don't look supernatural, like neither do these ones, but they make it feel lush, and that's what I wanted. And while you're in here, it feels super immersive, and it also feels pretty large, even though when I fly up here, it's not that big a forest. I can see all of it within my smaller render distance that I can force to use on my Mac. But I kind of made the path twist a little bit throughout it and made it feel as big as possible. I tried to maximize the forest size the best I could using the rocks and other things I mentioned earlier to create positive sightlines. Thank you for watching. Here's a couple exterior shots of the forest so you can see that as well. I have another video on a completely different type of forest, so you can check that out too. I hope you enjoyed and feel inspired. Goodbye for now.